Well, good morning. Today you're going to hear a lot of fantastic ideas. But what I'm going to do today is to sort of see if I can paint a broader picture. And if you look at the latest MIT campaign, the campaign is all about making it a better world. So I'm going to go a little bit more global, talk about the whole world, and then come back to MIT, and then maybe we can talk about opportunities for all of you to engage in different aspects of MIT. So if you look at the world has 7 billion people, out of which 2 billion people have disposable income, and about 5 billion don't have disposable income. And they both have problems. And it's solving those problems that creates opportunities for all of us in some ways. That's what drives the economy, that drives the GDP, GNP, and so on. And over the last 10 years, we've moved quite a few people from the bottom to the top. But if you want to so increasingly, each one of us are looking at ways to make a difference in the lives of these two groups of people. And then that's where the innovation comes in. How do you innovate in a way so that you can make a huge difference in the people who have disposable income, but people who also don't have disposable income? And in US, that would be about 80%, 20%. And we do a lot of work in India, our foundation, and that would be 20%, 80%. So but the way you make difference in the lives of these two sets of people is a little different. When people have disposable income and they have a problem, they're looking for solutions. They're Googling for solutions. And therefore, if you really want to make a difference in their lives, you have to compete for the opportunity. So you have to bring something new to the world, either a technology, a new business process, a shared economy, some new idea. So you need innovation. Innovation becomes extremely important to make a difference in the lives of those 2 billion people. But then that innovation, it has to be directed to some burning problem that the people have. And if you have those two, then over the last 50 years, we've developed quite a bit of the ecosystem to actually make that idea have an impact. We have angel investing, venture capital, public markets. We have distribution channels, Amazon, Flipkart. We have all kinds of mechanisms to actually take those new ideas that are very relevant to the marketplace. And we need to do a lot more of that, because that's what drives the GDP, that's what drives the growth of every company, corporations, and so on. But when you come to the other part of the people, where people don't have disposable income, particularly at the very bottom of this pyramid, they're just struggling to get through the day. So it's not like they're really Googling for solutions. So when you want to have an impact on their lives, it's a little bit different. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about both. And most of the innovation that a lot of you are involved with is probably more at the top. But if you are a global player, like most of you are, you do have to worry about all the 7 billion, because a lot of these people will become consumers and customers as the company grows. So if you look at the people who have disposable income, innovation becomes very, very important. And then you direct it to burning problems that they have, and then you get the impact. So most of the companies that I did in 70s and 80s, a lot of the core technology, actually, the innovation came from places like Bell Labs and IBM and so on, because they were all monopolies. They funded these fantastic idea machines, which came up with lots of ideas, and they couldn't care less who commercialized it. But I joined the MIT Corporation in 2000, and so one of the things that we wanted to do was see how, if there is no Bell Labs or MIT, how can places like MIT create more opportunities for entrepreneurs? And so that was the genesis of the Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation. And the core idea there is to make sure that if people have a new idea, and if they have a desire for impact, that they get connected to the world upfront. And this is where all of you come in. And this is where the whole business has changed. About 50 years ago, if you went to universities, they pretty much lived within the campus. They came up with the good ideas, whatever they thought were great ideas. The best among them patented it, and then the technology licensing offices went peddling those ideas. And very few of those ideas actually made any impact. Whereas today, the process is more, there are people who want to have impact, and there are some people who don't really care for impact. They're working really on pure science. And we should fund them, and we should let them have all the freedom that they need so that they can actually come up with these mind-boggling ideas that will have a huge impact 30, 40 years from now. But if people have a desire for impact, connecting them to people like yourself earlier on in the process makes a big difference. And that's what this Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation at MIT does. So what's the idea? The idea is you cannot have innovation unless you have a nurturing environment. You cannot have a constraint. You can't have like deadlines. You can't have like a company that's sort of saying, hey, you shall innovate tomorrow. So you create a nurturing environment. But every time you create a nurturing environment, the environment becomes clubby, and then it has a tendency to move further and further away from the real world. As it moves away from the real world, this happens in companies as well, same thing, R&D centers. That club, they get more interested in impressing each other than the impact. Not because they mean to, but that's the way the reward system works. That's how you only socialize with the people of your same type and so on. So if you want to have, so what happens is, let's say a MIT prof and graduate student, they have a fantastic idea today, and they want to have an impact with that idea. But if you talk to them 2 months from now, they'll have 10 more ideas, because that's what they are. They're a machine engine of ideas. And so the key value that all of you can add is in helping them pick and choose which of those ideas they should pursue if they want to have an impact. In the absence of that input, they'll pick an idea that's impressive to their colleagues, and I'm sure it'll be a fantastic publication and a scholarly work, but may or may not have an impact. So connecting innovation to relevance upfront as the thing is getting baked, as the thing is getting innovated, is a very, very important concept that MIT has been leading the world in. And so we started this center in 2002, and it became successful pretty quickly. So anything that went through the center was 3 times more likely to have an impact than otherwise. And so we introduced, and what happens is how the idea becomes the impact, it's not clear upfront. Because, just to give you an example of a company, the very first company that came out of the center, this professor from Fluid Dynamics, he had developed a camera, which was a very simple camera. It had a hole that was off-centered, and the thing would go round and round shooting photographs. And then he had the algorithms to pull together all these pictures to create the 3D image, and he could get a resolution of 9 micron with a very simple camera. So that was fantastic. And then he said, hey, and the reason why he did that is he did it to study fluid mechanics. They would put a particle in the turbulence and see how it moves around and see if the equations match that movement. And then he wanted to apply that to some application in the world. And so he thought, this was 2011, so 2000, after the Homeland Security thing. So he thought maybe he would use it for checking out people on the airports and scanning and quality assurance, all kinds of stuff. Finally, it turned out that the market to do 3D imaging of the dental was a real good market, because the only technology that existed before this company was that gooey stuff that you bite on and take the images, right? So they raised $5-6 million, $3 million, and they built this thing, and now it's on every dentist chair. So how the idea results in which product, that part of it is where MIT needs help from all of you, because they can come up with the idea, but where does it fit in is something which actually they get help from everybody else. And that's a part of the beauty of the MIT ecosystem, where MIT is very welcoming in terms of inviting people and letting them into their labs and really listening to what they have to say. So, and then we funded NSF to launch a program called I-Core, which is a nationwide program. And that's now sort of slowly, we're trying to spread this practice of connecting relevance to innovation throughout the country, and lots of companies are coming out. And then we have launched a similar program in India and so on. But let me talk a little bit more about the other people, the 5 billion people who don't have disposable income. When people don't have disposable income, this is not something that I was involved in, because most of my career was always in advanced technologies, and it was sort of the top of that pyramid in terms of doing companies and professional career and so on. But as a foundation, I and my wife were very interested in sort of seeing how we can make a difference. But because in some ways, all this innovation entrepreneurship is really creating the world in two separate ways, and unless we find a good way to use the same innovation and relevance to bridge that gap, it's not going to be a stable world. So what we found is that what's most important to make a difference in the lives of these people, particularly as you go to the very bottom, is that it's not innovation. It's not the idea that you bring to make a change does not have to be earth-shattering, competitive, patentable, but it has to be most relevant, because you're dealing with a customer base that are very different than you. They don't live like you. Their risk tolerances are very different. And therefore, we came up with this idea called the Social Innovation Sandbox, a program that we started about 12 years ago in India, and it's grown into a large program. It's almost like a company. We have 700 people in the payroll, a 300,000 square foot campus, a 100,000 square foot incubator. So I just want to summarize what's been done there and why it's relevant to the corporations. So this was the beginning. And so we found that it's important to co-create the solution in these communities, but also create the capacity within those communities to spread those solutions, whatever solutions that you come up with, because all the mechanisms that you have for the developed market, for the 20% people with disposable income, all those mechanisms don't exist for these economies. And so let me just give you one example of how, by doing all the things that all of you do in your companies, if you brought it to this segment of the market, how we can make a huge difference at a pretty reasonable cost. So, in India, a lot of the children come hungry to school. So, and then government has a midday meal program, but it doesn't quite work. And it's kind of hard for children to be in school and learn if they can't even get a good meal. So this particular organization said, why don't we use advanced engineering, supply chain, procurement, accounting, all the good stuff that you use in all your companies, and see if they can solve the problem. So they built a kitchen, and from one kitchen, they make 175,000 meals every day, right? And then they have all these vehicles, and they go and drop the food off before 12. The children are served food, and then they bring back all the vessels, clean them up, and restart again next day morning. They can actually serve a good meal, a meal that you probably eat in any of the Indian restaurants, a little bit better than that, for $40 for the whole year, right? It's almost like 20 cents a meal. The government has a midday meal program, and they give us their budget, which is about $20, and we raise the other $20. So it's a little bit more of a social enterprise, and a lot of the companies are involved in lending their technology and processes and so on. So we've been scaling it, and today we do 1.7 million meals every day. So just 2 months ago, we served the 3 billionth meal, right? So it's a the cost points, the products, the features tend to be very different for that space than what it would be for the people in the 2 billion. And so a lot of these things slowly also convert into a big business opportunity. For example, a lot of you probably know Mukesh Ambani from Reliance in India. He started a company called Jio, which is a telecom company, and now I think 215 million subscribers, but very soon he wants that to be more than 500 million subscribers. And he does it all at a very, very low cost, right? And so coming up with solutions which are mind-boggling can penetrate those markets very rapidly. And what happens is that those solutions will then percolate back to the $2 billion economy. In the sense, when we started companies, for example, first company I started, which went public 94 or so, telecom company, Cascade Communications, the usual process would be you develop a technology for data communications in US, you sell it for 5 years, 5 years later you take it to Europe, 10 years later you sell it in Japan, 10, 15 years later you sell it in China and India, and then that's how the technology moved globally. But now what happens is that because some of those markets are so price sensitive that the type of innovation that you have to do in those markets is very different. And so the technologies that you develop there, after a while, become very mature, and then they come back. So it's a reverse innovation. So the innovation does not necessarily just go one way. And there's a lot of that stuff that's going to happen in almost every field, I think. For example, testing blood right now. Testing blood in US is maybe $100, $200. But there's a lot of technologies which can do it for $1 to $10. But those technologies are not accurate enough to compete with the existing accuracies. So what will happen is a lot of those tests will probably start getting developed in underdeveloped countries, Africa, India, and so on. And once they do 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion tests, all those things will get perfected so well that they would have more accuracy than the accuracy that we have currently in US, and then they would come back again. So it's very important for all of you to make sure that you keep your eyes on what's going on, because innovation is all about making something happen either 10 times cheaper, 10 times faster, or 10 times better than what you have. And so there is a context in which you innovate. And what happens is that when you have these other economies where the context is very different, the constraints are very different. And so it's very important to have that global perspective. So this is the big campus that we built in India to build that capacity. And we have a 100,000 square foot incubator. So we talked about how it's important to do relevance and innovation to have impact on that bottom of the market. But if you have to scale that impact, let's say even the 1.7 million, which is very impressive, is only 1.7% of the 100 million children that need to be fed in India. So if you want to go to 100 million from 1.7, you're not going to get there with a linear process. You need a non-linear process. You need a breakthrough, either in policy or financial engineering or some technology or nutrition or something. And so there is a time when if you achieve a certain amount of proof that something can be done, then applying these big ideas, very big ideas, which are coming mostly from that $2 billion economy, is a way that you can actually have a systemic impact. And I just want to flip through a couple of slides here just to show that this is not just what happens in India or other developing countries. This is also applicable for US. In US, there is about 300 cities which sort of did well, but now are not doing that well. They're impoverished. They're being left behind. Because in all this new process of innovation and automation and so on, there are people who are automating and there are people who are being automated. And we need to sort of make sure that the people who are being automated, people who are being left behind, have an equal opportunity to come back into the process. And that's what we have been doing in India. So we brought this thing back here about 10 years ago. It's called Entrepreneurship for All. So these are all entrepreneurs where we started off in Lawrence and Lowell, Massachusetts, which is an old textile mill. a huge amount of unemployment and so on. But it's a very very nice program in the sense, and it shows that the innovation entrepreneurship that works in the very high end, same thing can work in the bottom as well. So 60% of our entrepreneurs are unemployed, 73% women, and so on. And it's amazing to see the impact that it can have. And right now, there's a lot of companies started, a lot of people hired, and so on. And right now, we're running it in Lowell, Lawrence, Fall River, Bedford, Lynn, Holyoke, Cape Cod. We're launching Colorado, California, and Boston downtown. And so the goal is to get to 50 different places within the next 3 years. And that would create a huge amount of economy within those communities. And they all become consumers for a lot of the companies that you run and so on. So it's important that we find ways to stoke that economy at the bottom who are being left behind so that they become full participants in this whole innovation cycle. So let's get back to how all of you can become a more intimate part of the MIT. And if I were to look at one big paradigm change is that, in the old days, companies had problems and they would bring the problems to MIT and say, would you have a solution for this problem? Which is very important, and that's a process that will continue to go on. But in addition to that, I think what's happening now with all the multidisciplinary approach is that innovation makes solutions happen in areas that you didn't even expect, whether it's technological innovation or a business process innovation. Uber upsets a whole bunch of other industries. Airbnb upsets the whole hotel industry. So innovation can come from places where you're not quite looking. So it's very important for you to have sort of so it's not an innovation. When you look for innovation at MIT, there's two ways you can go at it. You can come to MIT and say, I have this problem, and I think there's about 5 approaches which should solve this problem, and let me see what MIT is doing in these 5 approaches. The other way, but you also need to make sure that you leave a little bit of bandwidth to just sort of walk around, to do a random walk within MIT and see what's going on. Because there could be things happening at MIT that will impact your industry and your adjacent industries in ways that none of us ever thought was possible. So looking for ideas, random ideas where things are happening is also very important. And so, and MIT, Rafael Rafe came up with this thing called the orchard of innovation. And so it starts all the basic research and keeps going all the way until you have a commercial production. And we need you to come from this side and engage with the basic research so that we actually have some impact. So if you look at the entrepreneurial activities, there's a lot of stuff going on at MIT. And so there's a lot of different ways for you to engage either in these 25 fantastic startups that are coming out or just in the process of how they get formed over the course of time. So the opportunities are tremendous, and I think today you're going to get a good feel for what's coming out of this ecosystem. And I'm sure you'll have a fabulous day today. So, well, if anybody have any questions, I think we have about 3-4 minutes.
So before we go to the questions, we have a number of, before we go to the startups, and I'm going to ask them to start lining up here, we have a number of questions here, and we'll take the ones according to votes here. So the first one, if we can bring that up, with abundance of diverse data, should India become the first stop for all startups? Breakthroughs 10x from India can then find global markets.
Yeah, I think you're already seeing it in China, for example, with AI and a lot of these things. They're growing very fast because they have access to data. But then we also get into the privacy of the data and so on. For example, clinical trials in India, there was a little bit of a backlash and people said, no, you cannot do clinical trials in India. And then now I think they're putting enough bells and suspenders around it so that it will be available. But I think absolutely, I think because the diversity of the population is so huge that the amount of data that you can capture in those countries is huge. So you can get to the conclusions very rapidly as opposed to looking at some of the countries where the data is very homogeneous, particularly in the healthcare business.
All right, the next one here. To get the poor people out of poverty, it is not by technical innovation, but by creating jobs for them through economic development. That's why China has much fewer poor people than India, right?
Yes. So, I think the best way to lift the people out of poverty is to create that economy. In fact, it's all this innovation that all of you have done, which is lifting 300-400 million people every year out of the poverty into people who have disposable income. And we need to do more of it. But if you go to the very bottom, those people need help in terms of making sure that, I think the biggest thing that we have to make sure is that the world does not lose hope. Hope is the biggest asset that any community has, any nation has, any world has. And we need to make sure that people don't lose that, so that they actually are inspired enough to take advantage of all the technology that all of us are coming up with.
All right, one more here. What about data and AI for addressing problems for the 7 billion? What do you see as most promising?
Well, I think in all the areas, in education, in health sector, and so on. For example, if you take education, right now, the big thing in education is all about teaching at the right level. That is, instead of putting people through kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and just, it's a time-based education right now. And it has nothing to do with whether somebody has learned anything or not. What you really want is teaching people at the right level of wherever they are. But how do you find out where people are at the right level? I mean, it's a very expensive process if you have a human being for every student. And so AI can play a big role. But again, the technology has to become a lot more mature. And people who are consuming this technology has to become capable enough and wanting enough to be able to take advantage of that. So it just takes time, and what all of us can do is to find ways to accelerate that timeline. The best example is probably telecom. When I started in telecom, I don't know, there were maybe a cell phone would mean a big suitcase, right? Obviously, very few people used it. But now, it doesn't matter how poor you are, everybody has a cell phone. It's a very complex instrument, but the way you use it and the benefit that you get out of it is just fantastic. And so I think technology has to mature. People have to become more capable of absorbing the technology, and then you need people in between who are connecting the technology to the people so that it actually brings that economic value that people are looking for.
All right. Thank you very much, Desh.
Thank you.
It's very interesting and inspiring. So we're going to go to the startup presentations.